Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When I first met my husband 12 years ago, I never imagined I'd be in this situation. We were both working at a children's hospital, him in pediatrics, me in occupational therapy. Our shared passion for helping children made our connection instant and deep. His mother, a retired nurse, seemed pleased with our relationship at first, but everything changed when our son was born. Our beautiful boy came into this world 5 years ago with a rare genetic condition affecting his sight. As medical professionals, my husband and I approached it practically, determined to give him the best life possible. We adapted our home, learned everything we could about his condition, and most importantly, decided to raise him with complete openness about his disability. We wanted him to grow up confident, understanding that being sight impaired was just one part of who he was, not something to be ashamed of. My mother-in-law, however, had different ideas. Despite her nursing background, or maybe because of it, she treated our son's condition like some terrible tragedy. She would constantly send us articles about experimental treatments and miracle cures, refusing to accept that this was simply part of who he was. The incident that broke the camel's back happened last week. We decided to take her out for lunch at this new family restaurant downtown. Everything was going fine until my son mentioned his eyes were bothering him. I asked him gently if his eyes were feeling sensitive to the light today. He replied that they were feeling a bit ouchy. I suggested we could move to a table further from the window if he wanted. My mother-in-law immediately turned to my husband, completely ignoring our son's presence. She asked if we'd had him checked for light sensitivity, warning there might be something wrong. She started mentioning some new treatment she'd read about in Switzerland. I interrupted her, pointing out that we were actually discussing this with our son right now and that he could tell us exactly what he was feeling. Our son joined in, explaining in his sweet way that the light makes his eyes dance sometimes. That's when it happened. As my son's eyes had their natural, involuntary movements adjusting to the lighting, my mother-in-law gasped dramatically and grabbed my husband's arm. She demanded to know why he was doing that with his eyes. Her voice filled with panic, as if he was having some kind of medical emergency. The restaurant went quiet. Several people turned to look at us. I saw my son shrink in his chair, his little hands moving to cover his eyes. That was it. 5 years of her behavior, and this was the moment I'd had enough. I told her that he wasn't an it or a he when he was sitting right here. I reminded her that he was her grandson and could hear her. I explained that his eyes move sometimes because that's how they work, and if she had questions about his medical condition, she could ask them privately instead of announcing them to the entire restaurant. She tried to defend herself, claiming she was just concerned and bringing up her nursing background. I cut her off, telling her that as a nurse, she should know better than to treat a child like a medical curiosity, and as a grandmother, she should know better than to make her grandson feel like there's something wrong with him. I turned to my son and asked cheerfully if he'd like to go get ice cream instead, suggesting that this restaurant was a bit too bright. His face lit up as he eagerly agreed, asking if he could get chocolate. My husband stood up with us, telling his mother they would talk about this later and that her behavior today was completely unacceptable. When we walked out, I heard her trying to explain herself to nearby tables, repeatedly mentioning she was just trying to help and emphasizing her nursing background. Later that evening, my husband had a long phone conversation with her. He told her that until she could treat our son with respect and dignity, we wouldn't be seeing her. She tried to argue that she was just showing concern, that we were being too sensitive, but my husband stood his ground. 2 days later, she showed up at our house unannounced, clutching more printouts about experimental treatments. My husband met her at the door. She protested loudly that we couldn't keep her grandson from her, insisting she was just trying to help. My husband explained that either she needed to accept him as he is and treat him with respect, or she wouldn't see him at all. He emphasized that this wasn't about her or her medical knowledge, but about a 5-year-old boy who deserves to feel comfortable and accepted by his own grandmother. When she tried to bring up treatments again, I stepped in. I told her that neither the treatments nor she were welcome here until she could see her grandson as a person first, not a condition to be fixed. She left in tears, but for once, I didn't feel guilty. That evening, as I tucked our son into bed, he asked me something that confirmed we'd made the right decision. He wanted to know why his grandmother didn't like his dancing eyes. I explained to him gently that some people don't understand that different isn't bad, and that his eyes were perfect just the way they are. His response warmed my heart. He told me he liked them because they helped him see the world in his own special way. We haven't heard from my mother-in-law since then, and honestly, the peace in our house is palpable. My husband and I have agreed that until she can truly accept our son for who he is, this distance is necessary. I work as a delivery driver for a local restaurant, and yesterday was probably the most intense day I've had on the job. I've been doing this for about 3 years now, and I've seen my fair share of crazy drivers, but nothing like this. I was making my usual Saturday afternoon deliveries downtown. The weather was nice, so there were lots of people out walking, enjoying their weekend. I had just finished dropping off an order and was heading back to the restaurant when I heard the distinct sound of tires screeching. At first I thought someone was just being a jerk at a stoplight, but then I saw this bright red sports car zigzagging through traffic like it was in some kind of racing movie. The driver was deliberately making his car drift from side to side, forcing other cars to slam on their brakes. People on the sidewalks were jumping back, and some had to dive into shop doorways to avoid getting hit. I pulled over to call the police, and that's when I heard people screaming. The guy in the sports car was now doing donuts in the middle of the intersection. A group of tourists had to run into a coffee shop to avoid getting hit. An old lady who was crossing the street with her walker nearly got clipped. Thankfully, a couple of teenagers helped her get to safety. They were all yelling at the driver. The old lady was shouting that he could have killed someone, while the driver just mockingly told her to learn to move faster, claiming this was how real driving was done. One of the teenagers tried to reason with him, telling him he was insane and needed to stop before someone got hurt. The driver just brushed them off, saying they should mind their own business and that he was just enjoying his new car. I could see other drivers calling the police too, but this guy was just getting more aggressive. He started doing these wide drifts, getting way too close to the buildings. People were recording everything on their phones. That's when karma finally kicked in. He tried to do this really wide drift, but he completely lost control. His car spun out and slammed right into a streetlight pole. The impact was so hard that the whole pole started swaying. Everyone around just froze, watching as the pole creaked and groaned. Then, in what felt like slow motion, it came crashing down right on top of his sports car, crushing the roof. The crowd that had gathered erupted in cheers. Some people were actually clapping. I know it sounds mean, but after seeing how many people he almost hurt, it felt like justice. Emergency medical technicians arrived within minutes. When they pulled the driver out on a stretcher, he was still trying to act tough. He was ranting about how expensive his car was and demanding that someone pay for the damage. He kept insisting that it was everyone else's fault for not getting out of his way. The emergency medical technician tried to get him to stay still, warning him about a possible concussion, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept going on about his limited edition model and how he wanted everyone's insurance information. A police officer had to step in and inform him that they had dozens of witnesses and multiple videos showing him deliberately endangering people's lives. The officer told him he was facing serious charges once he was cleared by the hospital. The guy kept ranting as they loaded him into the ambulance, threatening to sue everyone from the city to the light pole manufacturer. Turns out he had just bought the car that morning and wanted to show it off. Well, he definitely made an impression, just not the one he was hoping for. The police took statements from everyone, and I heard later that they found empty beer cans in what was left of his car. Between the reckless driving, property damage, and driving under the influence charges, plus all the civil lawsuits from people he almost hit, I doubt he'll be doing any more real driving for a very long time. The old lady he nearly hit actually stuck around to give her statement to the police, and she made everyone laugh when she commented that while she might be slow with her walker, at least she knew how to drive without hitting things. I was 2 hours late finishing my deliveries that day, but my boss was pretty understanding when I showed him the video. It's now been shared all over our local social media, and people are calling it instant karma at its finest. 3 months ago, I discovered a lump during my routine self-examination. Being in my early 30s with no family history of breast cancer, I initially tried to convince myself it was nothing serious. However, after a week of constant worry, I scheduled an appointment with my doctor. What followed was a whirlwind of mammograms, ultrasounds, and finally a biopsy that confirmed my worst fears. The initial surgery was scheduled quickly, but the waiting game that followed was excruciating. 50 days of complete silence. Every time I called the hospital for information about my biopsy results, the receptionists would always say the same thing, that they didn't have any information yet because the multidisciplinary team hadn't met to discuss my case. Making matters worse, due to COVID restrictions, I had to attend all appointments alone. No family support, no hand to hold. Just me and my thoughts. Finally, I got called in for a checkup with my surgeon. When I entered his office, I couldn't help but make a lighthearted comment about how long they'd taken with the results. The surgeon responded by saying he'd explain everything in a minute after he grabbed my files. He left me with a nurse while I prepared for the examination. As I lay there on the bed, my mind was racing with possibilities, both good and bad. That's when the nurse, who was shuffling through my papers, casually mentioned that I had an appointment with the anesthesiologist at 11:30 upstairs. My heart nearly stopped. When I asked if this meant I needed a new surgery, the nurse's face immediately changed as she realized her mistake. She started backpedaling frantically, trying to downplay what she'd said by telling me that might not be the reason and that the doctor would explain everything. Those next few minutes were pure torture. My mind went to the darkest places, imagining every possible worst-case scenario. When the surgeon finally returned, he started the checkup, carefully choosing his words. I couldn't take it anymore and asked him directly if this was about needing another surgery. He froze mid-examination. When I explained that the nurse had mentioned the anesthesiologist appointment, I watched as his face turned red, but he quickly composed himself. He went on to explain that the surgery hadn't achieved clean borders, and after lengthy discussions with the chemotherapy and radiotherapy teams, they had decided on a second surgery. They had waited to inform me until they had secured an operating slot. To everyone's surprise, I broke into a smile and asked if this meant my lymph nodes weren't affected, and if I could keep them. The surgeon looked at me like I had grown a second head, telling me he'd never had a patient take news of a second surgery quite this well. After my examination, as I was leaving for my unexpected appointment with the anesthesiologist, I could hear the surgeon raising his voice behind the closed door. He was asking the nurse if she realized what she'd done and reminding her about their protocols for delivering sensitive information. His voice faded as I walked away, but I couldn't help feeling a bit satisfied. The nurse's face had turned ghost white, and I knew she'd remember this lesson for a long time. She was transferred to the administrative department, where she wouldn't have direct contact with patients anymore. Living with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, since I was 14 has been challenging. The condition makes my heart rate spike whenever I stand up, causing dizziness and fatigue. Combined with permanent nerve damage in my legs from a car accident 2 years ago, simple tasks like grocery shopping become a real struggle. My right leg tends to buckle and bow inward, making walking for extended periods painful and dangerous. I've learned to adapt, though. My dad has been my rock through it all, helping me navigate daily life while encouraging my independence. We have a system worked out for grocery shopping. He assists with reaching items and carrying heavy stuff, while I use mobility carts when available to maintain some autonomy. This day started like any other shopping trip. We needed to stock up on groceries, so Dad drove us to Walmart. As we walked in, I noticed 3 mobility carts lined up by the wall, a sight that always brings relief. Dad mentioned he needed to use the bathroom first, so I settled into one of the carts near the entrance to wait for him. While I waited, an employee approached me and asked if I was waiting for someone. I told her that my dad was in the bathroom. I didn't think much of her question at the time. I should have noticed her suspicious tone, but I was busy checking our shopping list on my phone. Dad returned shortly after, and we started making our way into the store. That's when things went sideways. The employee suddenly yelled across the store that the cart was for handicapped people only. Her sudden yell startled me so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. Stuttering from the shock, I told her that I knew it was for handicapped people and that I was handicapped myself. She shot back that she had seen me walk into the store and insisted I could walk around just fine. My heart was racing, and not just from my pots. I hate confrontation, but I've had to learn to stand up for myself. I told her that the details of my disabilities were none of her business, but I could assure her I was disabled. What happened next still makes my blood boil. This woman, this complete stranger, walked over, switched off the cart, and actually tried to physically pull me out of it. Thank God my dad was there. My dad immediately stepped between us, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. He angrily asked if she was going to interrogate everyone who used these carts about their health. The employee's face turned red as she insisted that I was too young to be disabled and accused me of just being lazy. The commotion attracted security, who came over to investigate. We explained what happened, and surprisingly, the employee didn't try to lie about it. She admitted to everything she'd done, probably thinking she was in the right. The security guard asked if I had proof of my disability. I didn't want to, but I stood up, letting them see how my legs buckled and my right leg bowed inward. The security guard immediately understood. The employee demanded to know why I hadn't just shown them this in the first place. I coldly told her that I didn't need to prove anything to a random stranger with no authority. She mumbled something under her breath and skulked away, but I wasn't done. After our shopping, I called corporate and filed a detailed complaint. Then I went a step further and filed a police report for assault, since she had tried to physically remove me from the cart. 2 days later, I received calls from both corporate and the store manager. They told me the employee had been terminated and would be barred from working at any of their locations. The police also took my case seriously once they reviewed the store security footage, and she's now facing charges for assault. I may look young and my disabilities might be invisible at first look, but that doesn't make them any less real. That employee learned the hard way that you can't judge someone's disabilities by their appearance or their age. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.